Welcome, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alexis Hazlitt. I am a nurse with PPMD's care team, and I am super excited for today's webinar where we are going to be talking about advocating for a successful school year for your child with Duchenne or Becker. And we are joined by three fantastic panelists today who have a wealth of knowledge. We have Jody Kraus, who is a learning and educational specialist at Children's Colorado Hospital for Children, and Jill Castle, who is a behavior and educational specialist, a PPMD consultant, and also a part of Little Hercules Foundation, and Patrick Motion, who leads PPMD's Adult Advisory Committee, and he was also a middle school public teacher. So we have a great webinar for you today. We're going to talk about the differences between IEPs and 504s, tips on how to talk to your child's school and communicate and work with them as a team, as well as some other resources that will be helpful for you as a family member, as well as resources to share with the school. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Jody Kraus, who is going to start us off.
Cool, great. So again, I'm Jody Kraus. Thanks for having me from Colorado. I've been over here for 14 years, and the muscle population is newer to me in the last couple of years. So I appreciate the opportunity to meet everyone with PPMD and to learn from you guys as much as it's an honor to teach you guys a couple things that I know. So support plans at school, big topic of conversation. You guys have the option of requesting, advocating for, researching 504 plans or IEPs. Of course, this is in addition to healthcare plans or other type of seizure plans that sometimes people have at school. But 504s and IEPs are your two main types of supportive plans, and there definitely are some big differences. Both plans offer accommodations to the physical learning environment. So those are oftentimes, access to an elevator, or our extended time to complete assignments or assessments, or moving through the hallways in an alternative fashion, maybe keeping books in separate locations versus carrying them. Those types of physical accommodations to the learning environment are available in both an IEP and a 504. The main difference with that IEP is that need or presence of a need for specially designed instruction, right? So the child exhibits either on formal assessment, on a body of evidence. Ideally, it's a mix of all of it, demonstrates a need for specially designed instruction in an individualized intervention in some way to access the general curriculum. So that is really the biggest difference. Of course, they are different laws that govern these two plans. IEPs are under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and ensure that children with disabilities have access to a free and appropriate public education. So tons of acronyms in both, more acronyms under IEPs. You can go on like understood.org. That organization has a great list of the acronyms to help when you are in IEP meetings or in webinars like this, and people are throwing out things like IDEA and FAPE and LRE, least restrictive environment, those types of things. The other piece too for the difference with the IEPs and 504s, every state's a little bit different. Even every district within a state can operate differently. But for the most part, access to therapies at school, like physical, occupational, speech therapy, that's going to fall under the umbrella of IDEA, under those IEPs. Those special services or special service providers related services are under the umbrella of special education. So if a child would benefit from or demonstrates a need for therapy at school, the team is generally considering the IEP, or a parent could request the IEP so that the child is assessed on whether or not therapy is needed at school. I have seen in the state of Colorado, in my child's district, for example, that 504 plans can include direct minutes of service from a school psychologist for like social emotional learning, but that's not consistent across the state. That seems to be a Denver Public Schools thing right now. Some of our smaller, more rural towns out here, I've heard that they can have access to the OT or PT consultatively through a 504 plan, but again, that's not uniform. I support the 7 surrounding states, and I can tell you like Wyoming's not doing that in many of their areas, but again, it's a little bit different wherever you are, but for the most part, your therapy services are gonna fall under an IEP. And those 504 plans are going to be pretty limited to those accommodations to the physical learning environment. There's not going to be the change in delivery of instruction. We're going to look at an IEP for that. Those are the big differences. We can go to the next slide. So lots of times the school will initiate either one of these plans, but in the event that they do not, a parent certainly has a legal right to request consideration of a 504 plan or an IEP at school. Best way to do it is to submit that request in writing. So we've got a paper trail of it. That's easy to do with email. You want to make sure that it's signed and dated, or there's a timestamp on there somewhere. And I usually recommend that families include a school nurse, a school administrator, counselor, whatever, if we're in high school, or a homeroom teacher if we're in elementary school. I would recommend including them all on the message. At Children's Colorado, I have a sample template. It was something that I just Googled, so that's something you can easily do. That lists I, the parent of said child, requests the school team open an eligibility process for my child for 504 or IEP. It's a good idea to list your concerns. My child has a diagnosis of Becker's or Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. They receive the following therapies outside of school. They have blah, blah, blah. Please send me permission to evaluate, for me to sign, and then put your name at the end, right? And this is another piece that varies slightly state to state and even individually in districts in each state. But what happens after that is within a reasonable time frame. The school will respond to your request. I've heard like in Kansas, it's 2 weeks. In Colorado, it's within a reasonable time frame that they will respond to your request in writing with either a yay, we agree with you and we're going to go forward with this, or a nay, we do not feel like we are going to go forward with the evaluation. Some people in some places, these requests automatically kick off the evaluation. That's not true in the state of Colorado. So I can't tell you if it's true where you live. But if a school is going to deny a parent request for an IEP or 504, in Colorado, they must write back to you and tell you why. Because, and they must cite data, because academic growth is the following, because your child is able to access the following. And in that denial, in the state of Colorado, they are to include a copy of the parental rights and procedural safeguards so that you as the parent understand your next steps should you want to take them. Like, okay, I'm going to file a complaint and say, the school might be violating my child's rights, or I'm going to seek an individual, or I'm sorry, an independent education evaluation. All of your next steps as a parent, the due process piece of it is written in those parental rights and procedural safeguards. So if the school is going to say, no, thanks, we're not going to go forward with it, they really need to tell you why with some solid data and then give you your rights. For the most part, even here in Colorado, where people are able to deny the parental request, they typically don't. They do typically go forward with the request. It's important to note that a medical or clinical diagnosis does not automatically equal educational diagnosis. They are not the same. Medically and clinically, we're using a different diagnostic criteria and tool to diagnose things like major neurocognitive disorder. That's not an educational diagnosis, it's a clinical one. Mild intellectual disability, moderate intellectual disability. The criteria is similar, not exactly the same. And the diagnostic like manual, the DSM-5, is not something a school uses, but a clinical psychologist does. So does your medical or clinical diagnosis of intellectual disability or learning disability or dyslexia automatically translate to the same thing at school and guarantee you that IEP or 504? No. There is no such thing as a prescription from a provider that translates into an IEP or a 504 plan. Hospitals, outside psychologists, outside providers, we can make recommendations, and we often do, right? But those recommendations are just that. We always recommend families to provide reports from the hospital to the school team for consideration into a body of evidence. We can't mandate the school do what we say. We're different. We're governed by different laws. We have different criteria. Younger children who are not quite school aged can begin the process of determining whether or not they qualify for extra support at school through a child find referral. So it's early intervention, for children under the age of 3. Once a child hits 3, you can reach out to the child find team within your district and schedule an evaluation to see if your child meets criteria for extra support for pre-K. I would go to your district's website, Google your district with child find behind it. You should pop up with your intake number in your website to begin that process. And something that I always like to talk to parents about that goes back to that submitting the request in writing or having a different opinion than the school is the destigmatizing, and I don't even know if that's a word. I'm a teacher and I don't know if that's a word, but destigmatizing that parental right and procedural safeguard piece of the due process. Like, what are your next steps if you and the school have a disagreement? You have the right to request mediation from the State Department of Education. Like, same thing like a divorce, right? Like, I want the house, you want the house, I want this. You don't have to go to court. You can request a mediator come in and kind of help you guys get to a common ground and make sure that everybody's heard. State Department of Education will offer you the same thing if they find that your request for mediation is warranted. You are also able to go look for advocates. You are able to request the IEE, somebody else who's a neutral third party to conduct your neuropsych eval. You can file a complaint with the state that says my kiddo's rights are being denied. And those sound crunchy and they sound like adversarial. They're not. The school has, in my opinion, and maybe the opinion hopefully of the people on this panel, but the school teams have all sorts of protections to help them, right? To support them. And this is yours. You go to IEP meetings and you are 1 or 2 parents sitting in a room full of 10 or 12 school staff. That's intimidating enough as it is. It can feel that way even though it's not supposed to. They have their own team if they need it, and these are your options to build your team and build your community. And so if you need extra help, and PPMD is there as well, if you need extra support and guidance, look at those parental rights and procedural safeguards and kind of figure out what's your next avenue. We could do a whole training on just this, but I'll leave it at that until we go to the questions. But those are your big differences for IEPs and 504s and what your kids have access to.
Thank you so much, Jody. Now Jill is going to talk to us a little bit more about the IEP plans, why schools do things the way that they do. Jill, I will let you give your introduction of the different roles that you have had throughout your career.
Thanks so much, Alexis. And thanks, Jody. That was so awesome. It's so fun to hear it explained from somebody else, like a different take on everything. So I really appreciate that. A couple things I wanted to just add to what you were saying was when they do deny the evaluation, that form they give you is called a prior written notice, and that's federal. So they're supposed to do that no matter where you're at. And then sometimes in a lot of the states, if that email requesting the eval, if you put in the bottom of it, take this as my informed consent, for states that follow it, that starts that 60-day timeline. So you don't have to wait for them another 2 weeks for them to respond. So just a couple little caveats that I was thinking of. So somebody asked me, I don't remember who asked me to do the cake thing today because it was helpful, but this is how I learned back when I was learning. One of the biggest questions I get from all the years I've been doing this is, I need a one-to-one. My son needs a one-to-one. We need a one-to-one, or we need adaptive PE. We need assistive technology. I'm going to explain how the school sees that so that we don't ask in a way that's going to immediately get it denied and you're not going to know why. Like parents will go, I need a one-to-one. I asked the school, they said no, they're just being difficult. They don't understand. That's not necessarily true. I used to work for the State Department. So I was in charge of going out to the schools and looking through all the paperwork to make sure they had it all lined up properly. And if they didn't, they got dinged by the State Department. So sometimes they seem like they're being difficult with you and you might not understand the reason why. And it could be a slight tweak in your approach. So I look at a cake, I learned it this way, but you look at a cake as an IEP and you've got this bottom layer and the bottom layer is the widest, right? And it's holding the next 2 layers up. That bottom layer is the present level of your IEP. So in your IEP, the first few pages, hopefully it's a few pages and not a couple paragraphs. If it's a couple paragraphs, we already have a problem. But in the first few pages of your IEP, it should be what you need, where your child is at in their present level. It's called the PLAF, lots of fancy names, but it's basically where they're at. It's going to have all the data. It should have some data and some numbers, not just people's opinions. Should have numbers and data that they collected from that evaluation, and it should be pretty robust, okay? The next layer of the cake is what I'm going to call the goals, okay? And those goals are derived from that present level. So they look at all the information of what they need, then they write goals, okay? That top layer is services. So those are based on the goals. So this is where people get tripped up because they'll go, well, I asked the school for a one-to-one and they said no. Okay. And I always say first, what does the present level say? What is that bottom layer of the cake? Because if the bottom layer of the cake isn't really robust, the whole cake will fall apart. So are you showing in the present level that they need one? Does the present level state all the places that they need that type of support? Is it behavior? Is it social skills? Is it advocacy? Is it physical? Like what are the needs, right? Then they write the goals. Is there goals that support the need for a one-to-one? So if we don't have a goal that says Johnny needs to get here to here independently or with minimal help, or needs extra attention, keeping him on task, that's a goal that could warrant a one-to-one. But if we don't have a goal that warrants that service, they can't give the service. They would literally get dinged by the State Department. So I think what I want people to understand is that there's a technical process that happens. Schools are not great at communicating this to parents. So they just say, oh, we can't do a one-to-one. And parent says, oh my gosh, I got to fight them. This is so bad. They don't care about my kid. And some, most of the time, I'm going to be optimistic, but most of the time that is not true. They're just not communicating with you that the way that the IEP is written does not financially cover those services for those schools. So I just want to explain that because then we can look at this more pragmatically and take the IEP apart and address it from that issue. Look at where do we need that support? At what time of the day? When do we need it? because we don't just automatically get that just because we have an IEP. Again, it's got to be in the present level. It's got to warrant a goal, and it's got to, once it has a goal, it's got to have a service then that supports it. That's it. Next slide. Okay. So then this brings me to, I really, really liked that Jody covered mediation and dispute resolution. I also see a lot on social media, which kind of makes me, because I worked for the State Department. Again, I am a certified mediator with the Attorney General. So I did a lot of mediations between school districts and families, and it works really well. And I see a lot of people on social media, you got to fight the school. Because the problem with that attitude is that you're going to be with the school for many years, whether it's middle school, 3 years, high school, 4 years, elementary school, you're going to be with them for a while. So sometimes you do have to do that. Absolutely. If if they're not honoring timelines, they're not giving you your parent rights, that's a complaint. If you have a philosophical difference, like I think my kiddo should be in mainstream and they think your kiddo should be in a special needs classroom, or you believe they deserve services and they don't, that's kind of more philosophical. That's mediation. Okay, those are the different things. That is about building a team. It's about building a team that's going to work for you and your son, your person, for all the years to come. I have a lot of parents that are paying a lot of money for advocates and lawyers and things like that. Nothing wrong with bringing an advocate, but working for the State Department, I've never seen, you do not need a lawyer until you get all the way to dispute resolution process. And even then, the law states they have to do mediation first. So you're going to be kicked back to mediation first anyway. And in mediation, you don't bring an attorney, you use the mediator. So I hate to see parents run and their first reaction is to go pay for a lawyer. It's not necessary most of the time. PPMD has free services. There's lots of other free services. If you have to pay an advocate, totally understand, but to pay an expensive attorney is really should just be saved for extreme dispute resolution with the State Department, right? Emotions, defensiveness. This is another thing. And I don't want to sound like I'm not on the parent's side. Those of you who don't know me, I have a 25-year-old son with Duchenne. He comes first. I'm a parent first. But I've worked for years with the state and with the school districts, in all different sort of roles. And I see that I would say 90 to 95% of the time, it comes down to a communication issue. Nobody's evil, right? So I just think that it's best to start with the fact that we as parents are typically in grief. We have a lot of emotions because we have something very big that we want to do something about, and there's not a lot we can do sometimes. And so we need to put that energy somewhere. And so sometimes that turns into a fight and, putting us in this state where we have to fight for everything that we get. I don't know. I did that for a long time. So no judgment. I get, and it has its use. A lot of things get done with that kind of ambition and passion in the beginning of the diagnosis. But I found over the years what ended up being ultimately way more effective is when I looked at it kind of like running a business, and I worked in creating a team, and I worked in handling all the team members and all the providers like they were my employees almost, and, navigating it that way and seemed to be a lot more effective. I still, of course we still get emotional. I get so frustrated. I hate navigating all this stuff, especially when I'm not in a healthy state. It's really, really difficult. But what happens is it immediately makes the school defensive. They're scared of the parents. And so the walls go up immediately and you're done. You're done with, you're now in the problem. You're not in the solution. And everybody's broken down, and the simplest problem can be a standstill. So that's where we do one-to-ones, and we get in there and we help you talk to the school and recognizing the stage of grief that you're in. Are you feeling angry? Are you feeling sad? Do you feel overwhelmed? And explaining that to the school so they can be on your side. So I think I set a timer because everyone who does know me knows I like to talk a lot, and I'm very passionate about this, so I get a little carried away. So I will move on now to Patrick, who always has a lot of wisdom.
Thank you, Jill. That was so helpful. And I love the cake analogy because it gives such a good visual of the different goals. And I think you said it perfectly. When we do one-to-ones with families, we're always coaching families on how to work with the school as a team. And really using that word when you're talking with schools to help get the outcome that you want as a parent and that the school wants as well, which is to help the child during school. So Patrick's going to talk a little bit more on this. So Patrick, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. It's tough to follow those two great speakers. And I also want to add quickly that we realize we do have some questions coming into the chat, and we will get to those at the conclusion of our presentation. But keep the questions coming because they're great and we will address them. So as Jody and Jill both referenced, first you have to be okay. Before I get into that, as far as you have to be okay going into the meeting. I'll talk about that in a second. For those of you that don't know me, I live with a form of muscular dystrophy, and as they said at the earlier part of this webinar, I am a retired teacher. I spent almost 3 decades in a middle school. So I've attended a lot of IEP and 504 meetings for students with a whole host of range of supports that were needed to be put in place. But also, I myself had a 504 as an adult in the school setting for things that I needed as reasonable accommodations from my own employment. So I have a kind of a little bit of a unique perspective. One of the things that I've noticed a lot over the years is when parents come in, as Jill just mentioned, they can be in various stages of grief, completely to be expected. And the first thing we try to do at the school level is put the parent at ease, because we know this is something that you're not just professional navigating. You need to be coached, counseled, you need to be educated, you need to learn how to best speak up for your child. And that's another place where we at PPMD can help you, or you can go find another community source that's near you as far as maybe coaching before you go into the meeting about how to ask versus demand, things that you can say, buzzwords that you can use to make you feel more confident in what you're about to go do. It's kind of set up sometimes like going to buy a car. You realize at the end, you're the one with the $30,000 and you make the choice. But when you go to the car dealership, they make it sound like, we're going to do this is all on our side. And they set it up so that you feel bad about your actions when you're the one holding all the power. It's your child and you know your child best, and you're going to be the child's best advocate. But if you go in, as Jill said, and you have a list of demands, again, from our side of the desk at school, that's kind of a turnoff, because although your child is important, so are all the other kids in the classroom. And you may be coming in talking about Duchenne and Becker muscular dystrophy, but after this, I'm going to speak to another parent about somebody that has asthma, and then someone that's got learning difficulties, and then somebody that has anxiety. So there's all these different things on our side going on, thinking about how can we keep all the kids safe in the classroom and feel supported. So it's always better to approach it as that, and make sure you're clear that, hey, look, we're all working from the same side of the table here, and we all want the best for the child, which is to be safe, supported, and engaged at school as much as possible. And schools will buy into that right away. It's a little bit more difficult if you come in with a list of demands. Also be aware that because Duchenne and Becker are rare conditions, it is likely your school district has no idea about the condition. So you're going to need to educate not only the school personnel and special ed department, but I say all adults that are going to be in contact with your child. So when you go in for the meeting, and you may want to have more than one, yes, this could be a special ed meeting for IEP 504, but everybody always says include the classroom teacher, include the nurse, include special ed, include guidance. All completely great advice. But I also have seen, especially when the child gets older, involve the people that are going to be with your child at lunch, adults that may be with your child at recess time, everybody that comes into contact. Because as you know, when you're younger with Duchenne and Becker, the symptoms don't necessarily present outright. So if a kid loses his balance, falls, you don't want an adult not knowing what's going on. So you're going to need to also educate everybody about your child's special muscles, which is an easy way of doing it when the kids are little. Next slide, please. We at PPMD have developed some resources, and we also are going to give you, we'll drop a link in for how you can find these. They are on our website, but we have found these to be effective, and they are yours to use, and you can share. On the left, there's a thing you can give to the classroom teacher about your student. Also, it can go to the nurse, it can go to everybody. It's not, as you can see, it's not medically based. It's more what all the kids do at the beginning of the year. Here's the stuff I like, here's the strengths, here's the challenges. Your classroom teacher likely does not know or has a very vague idea of what muscular dystrophy is. So that's an ongoing conversation as the disease changes, or if the kid is tired, more tired one day or than the next, you're going to want to keep open communication. On the right-hand side, maybe this is better for the nurse's office or people that are going to be involved medically with your child, of things to do. Not, we say emergency, we don't want to alarm anybody, but that's also if somebody falls down at recess, or there are, as you know, being a parent of a child living with Duchenne and Becker, there are extra steps that may come into things, and you're going to want to speak with the nurse and the other school personnel about that. And while I'm on the subject, again, all of us, Jody, Jill, myself, and Alexis, we realize we're giving you an awful lot of information in a short amount of time. And you watching this right now, you may be a seasoned pro and you may have an older child. You say, I do this every year. That's great. However, you also may be brand new and you might be sitting there thinking, there is no possible way I can do all this by myself. We totally understand that, and we are here to offer you additional supports. Next slide, please. And these aren't just today on the webinar, these are for as long as we are here, we will help you. These guides are a little bit more dense, and again, we'll send out the link in the school resources. We have specific links for different things. These are master classes that your teachers at the school can take if they want to learn more in depth about Duchenne and Becker muscular dystrophy. So you can lead them to these if you're not comfortable speaking about it yourself. You also can, as you can see on the screen, there's adaptive phys ed, and there's diagnosis, early childhood, and we have 3 levels: early childhood, like middle school level, and we also have high school education guides for the staff. These, again, are extremely dense, and it's a lot to read. And as a teacher, I looked at these and I thought, the first thing my thought was, I don't have enough time to do this, to do it justice. So we also have a little like 1-page quick introduction for you. And Alexis and I have also filmed a short video that you can share with your school that's a little over 10 minutes, which somebody could watch during lunch or their preparation time. That would be easier as well. Finally, Jill and myself, Jody by invite, Alexis here at PPMD, we are happy to talk with you and or your school personnel if you would like us to come to any of the meetings, if you would like us to virtually attend and educate your staff a little bit more about Duchenne and Becker. We're happy to do that as well, and everything we offer here is free of charge. So as you are going through this process, if you are feeling overwhelmed, stop, take a breath, reach out and email us. Stop, pause, ask us any questions, and please don't feel bad at all about saying, I'm just in a space where I'm not very comfortable. Are you able to come and speak to the school? Or you can offer to the school. I have a company that I work with, a nonprofit, and they're happy to do a little staff training for you. Alexis and I have done those as well, and we can get them down to under 30 minutes so that your school district doesn't think we're taking a whole day of their professional development. Next slide, please. Speaking of resources, lastly, on our main page of parentprojectmd.org, you can sign up for PPMD for You with any one of our staff and to talk about anything that's on the screen. We're focused on school and education today, but you can also talk to people about resources and benefits in your state, coordinating your care, if you're newly diagnosed, uh, genetics, genetic testing. Basically, you can talk with us about anything. And if we don't know the answer, we will find the answer for you. But the PPMD for You is a great opportunity for you to speak with us one-on-one or one-on-two in a definitely a low pressure setting and talk about any concerns you might have. And those are also not a one-time thing. None of this is a one-time thing. We're here to help as long as you would like us to help. We have some families we meet with at the beginning of every school year just to kind of go over things and retune and retool. We want your child to be safe, supportive, and engaged at school as much as possible. So I think that's all I have. And we know we said a lot, but we want to make sure we also leave room to answer the questions that have come in and get any questions that are coming in now. If you are watching this webinar and it is not live anymore and you're watching it in the future, the email addresses that you're going to see on the next screen that you can pop up for a moment. Next slide, please. You are welcome to email us if this is not live right now and you're watching this in the future with any school questions or anything else related to Duchenne and Becker that you might have. So with that, I'll go back to our host, Alexis. Maybe we'll get to some of the questions.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. That was so helpful, and just a lot of wonderful information. And as Patrick said, we are all here that if you want to reach out after this webinar, we're happy to talk with you more in depth or individually to talk about your child. There are a few questions coming in. So again, please feel free to drop them in the chat. One of the first questions, Jill, I'll start with you, and then maybe Patrick and Jody, you can fill in as well. But as far as safety planning goes with evacuations, lockdowns, fire drills, how do you plan for those? Who is the best person at the school to talk to about that?
So great question. So whether you have an IEP or a 504, the school admin knows the campus the best, right? And they are able to look at a plan to safely get someone if they're in a chair, if they're not in a chair and they're still walking, but maybe need to have a manual chair nearby in case of that so that they can get them out as quickly. Those are just common sense things that schools should be able to do, right? If they can't, because that does happen, right? And if I've had situations where the school's been a little difficult because it's just too much for them to handle. They don't have the solutions. They're not collaborating, because usually if you collaborate and common sense isn't working, then creativity does. So, some situations, it all varies. It depends on the campus. It depends on the kid. It depends on where he's at in the process. Depends on his peers and his teachers. I mean, there's so many variable answers and solutions. So it really comes down to the collaboration of the team and to be creative and to work together. Now, if that's not working, you've tried all that, nobody's getting anywhere, and you don't feel like your child is safe or anybody's taking it serious, I have found that a good way to get that solved is to call the fire department and ask for the fire chief to just come out and do a little look-see of the campus. They've got a ton of experience of exiting people in emergencies. They have creative solutions. They have creative ideas. And then what that does, it gives the school another person to help them, which is positive. But on the other end, it also gives the school a little bit of accountability in the process, because now we've got another agency involved that's going to be making sure that everybody's taking this as seriously as it needs to get. So it doesn't need to be in a threatening manner, but it just coincidentally will help make sure everybody's accountable.
I would just quickly add that for me personally, that's something I had written into my 504 as an employee, that if I was taking my class anywhere outside of my classroom space, I had to let the office know where I was going to be in the building, so that if first responders or somebody needed to come in an emergency, I had a designated safe space for fire drills if I was on the second floor, or if I was in a place where there were no exits that were easily accessible to me, whether they be near a staircase or whatever. It was called the safe space or the evacuation space, because there are also often kids at school that are using crutches, or kids that are otherwise injured from sports or other things. So it's probably not just your child. There are probably a few people at any given time that are going to be needing this sort of assistance. So yes, I agree with Joe about the fire department, but that's a conversation that I would bring up earlier with the school and say, look, where's my child gonna be? Does everybody know where my child is? And what's the evacuation plan should my child need help? They actually practiced with me once on a fire drill. Upstairs, the fireman actually did the fireman's carry, took me out of my wheelchair. I'm 150 pounds, only 150, ladies, don't laugh. And they carried me down. And boy, the kids thought that was just hilarious, but they wanted to practice. So, they're on it as long as you, again, make sure that they're aware. And again, it's not probably just going to be your own child. I can't imagine any time when there isn't someone else in the school that has a twisted ankle and is using crutches or something like that. So that's my
Yeah,
add-on.
I want to add, we had a little heads up on this question, so I tapped into all of my friends lovingly call my husband Mr. Kraus only because he is a school principal by trade. Now he is the director of elementary schools for Denver Public Schools. But when he was a school principal, I used to tag Mr. Kraus for everything. So I tagged Mr. Kraus for this question. And he said he had 2 center-based programs in the last elementary school that he was principal at, and he had they were severe needs programs. And so he said what he did was during a lot of these lockdown drills, because there's so many opportunities, sadly, for children to practice, is that he would tag the district's orientation and mobility specialists also, and he would request that they would come to the school to participate in the practice with his classrooms that had the most impacted kids with special needs from a mobility perspective, so that problem solving was like happening in real time. And then he said also that they were required to post their lockdown protocols and evacuation drills in their sub plans and somewhere in the classroom. So should there be something going on that day where it wasn't the primary teacher, and that the child or children who had additional needs or some alternative type of plan, that was posted in addition in a different color with a different, kind of how we use all sorts of visual strategies to cue things for kids with disabilities as a way to cue the adults to the separate plan. So he suggested those 2 things. Was one, having the district's representatives for orientation and mobility, or at the state level, anyone kind of come and support those practices. So you can kind of help nail down the best plan and then make sure you're posting that in an appropriate location.
Yeah, I would also just say too that coming into play these days, there are a lot of administrators and school personnel that are doing things via app. And they're able to list school attendance, so kids evacuating can be tracked very easily through an app. So ask your school what technology they're using as well. We had to have double plans, as Jody just mentioned. We had to have it in a subfolder in our classroom, and we had to have it on file in the office, so that there were 2 ways for us to be reached should we need to. So ask them about technology as well, because there might be something that we haven't even thought of yet.
Thank you all. Okay, the next question, maybe Jody, will start with you. And then Patrick, how do you approach the school districts when they're short-staffed as far as advocating for monitors on the bus or in the classroom? What's the best way to approach the school district when they just don't have enough staff to support the children with extra needs.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so monitors, I'm going to sub that word with paraprofessionals or techs, because that's what they're called where I live. And then I'm actually going to loop Jill in, because I'm going to go back to that present levels of functioning. So yes, it's an issue of being short-staffed sometimes, oftentimes, and that is like a nationwide issue. Even in huge districts like where I live, the cost of living in Denver's astronomical, and unfortunately, we can't hire these positions because nobody can afford to live here and make $20 an hour. So it is short-staffed, but again, it's also whether or not the school reads in an IEP that a child's level of need suggests that they have a paraprofessional in the classroom or on the bus. What do you think about that, Jill?
A couple comments. Yeah, that you're on target, obviously, but sometimes, we can put everything we want into the IEP, and we can even say it's all legal and they have to do it.
Right.
But if they have no one, they have no one. Like
Yeah.
you can't just produce, a solution sometimes. There is a place that most people don't know about. Even when I was working with school districts, they didn't know about it. There's a place in the IEP under services where you can actually put supports for teachers. And if you know to put that in, they're even more legally mandated to get a support for the teacher, which of course is then a support for your child. It's kind of a tricky workaround, and just a lot of people aren't aware of it, but we can always go over where that's at. But creativity is key too, because say going with this one-to-one example, although this applies for adaptive PE, this applies for assistive technology or any of the other services you're trying to get. Creative solutions. Sometimes a peer can help. We don't always want, like, I remember my son had this older lady who mothered him and when he was really young, and she followed him everywhere. And you can't specifically ask for who you want as an aide. You just get to the service minutes, right? You don't get to say who that is. So the actual person possibly could be detrimental and work against what you're trying to do. So you have to really look at it case by case. And if you have a situation where a bunch of peers can be trained to, you have to be flexible in your thinking about what this solution is going to look like. There's often some creative solutions, even if the district's falling short on their funding and they're really scrambling to try to make it right, but they just don't know how.
It
And I
also
would
could be,
also,
sorry, Joe, no, I was just gonna say it's case to case, right? We don't know the details of your question, how far the ride is, all this other thing, so that would be another, reason to set up a one-on-one with us, and we can talk through your exact specific situation. Sorry, Jody.
no, that's okay. I was going to say something similar, like what is the reason for the para, right? Is it to access instructional stuff? Then what maybe could the special education teacher and the general education teacher do differently or better, right, to make accommodations and or modifications, whatever's written in the IEP, to ensure that we're accessing instruction better? Is it safety, right? Going on what Jill was saying too, like what's the nature of the need for the para, and that can kind of help figure out those creative solutions.
Yeah, a lot of people in our community, when I ask them that, they say they want the para because their kid falls and the para will stop. They're scared. But a para doesn't stop falling. I mean, unless they're holding them all day or hover, so we got to really like look at it, and look at what's best. And assistive technology stands in now sometimes for para. Like, why are you going to have somebody write all your stuff out when you should be using assistive technology so you can be independent? So each case is unique, right?
Yeah. And I think we use the word creative or creative creativity a lot when we do coaching with families. If there's not a clear solution, we can find a creative way to get there. So that's really helpful. The next question here is about transitioning to the next grade level or the next school. So when is the best time to talk with the school and or the teachers about their diagnosis and their IEP and what's in it and what the expectations are? Do you do it at the beginning of the year? Do you do it before the year starts? Patrick, do you want to start and then Jill chime in?
We usually, from the teacher point of view, we would get everything from the prior year when kids were coming up to us. And again, I was a 6, 7, and 8 building, so the 5th grade staff would send over the paperwork. So we would get a little bit of that before the school year even began. But as far as you, the parent, I would, if it was me personally, I would, at least if it's going to be a new school year, I would go spring before the next school year starts without even thinking about the IEP yet. I would just want to bring my kid over there after school maybe and have a tour and talk around, walk around, meet some people, figure out what's going on first before you get into the nitty gritty of what they're going to need, because they're going to want to see the lay of the land. Jill, Jody?
Yeah, I guess, I would say maybe not the best first week of school. I
Yeah.
mean, I have a lot of parents that are demanding IEP meetings and meetings with their teachers. That first week of school is so crazy.
We're
They're
overwhelmed.
upset because, I mean, keep your expectations low for that first week. Set up whatever you have to just get through it. Keep it, and let everybody kind of get their wits about them, because you want them to take the information in. You want them to be in a space where they can understand and receive it. If you, push it onto them when they're completely overwhelmed as an educator, it's not going to be as effective. So, like Patrick said, go early and, introduce people, make friends if it's a new school. You're going to have a transition meeting if you're going from
Yes.
elementary to middle. You're going to have a transition meeting anyway, or middle to high school, right? You're
Yep.
going to have a transition meeting before the end of the year with the new team
New
at the
school. Yep.
school. Yeah. We just don't wait until the year. But if it's a new school year, it's a school you've been to, take notes on everything that's kind of a mess that first week, and then schedule a meeting for like the second week and get it ironed out.
Yeah, that's what I was going to add to Alexis, is typically those, not typically, under IDEA, it's mandatory to have those transition meetings. So they should happen in the spring. Services under IEPs oftentimes look vastly different from elementary to middle, especially. Those minutes of service in elementary school are often pull out minutes, right? And then oftentimes in middle school, especially larger ones, there may be co-taught classes, or in high schools, there may be core replacement classes. And so kids are like, I oftentimes get referrals where parents are like, well, my child never sees a special ed teacher anymore. But really, they're just not realizing that their English language arts class is actually taught by the special ed teacher now that they're gone to middle school, right? So usually in the spring, you should be having that meeting with representatives of the new school if it's a big transition like that.
And also make sure everybody remembers an IEP is a working document. You don't
Fluid. Yep.
just meet once a year. I mean, you meet anytime you're having these serious questions or a challenge, And you can also make rapport with the individual players. So you don't have to call a whole team meeting because he's having trouble in PE. I mean, you do if big changes need to be made, but if it's just a sorting things out, it can be done with the providers or the teachers individually too first. That's usually more effective because you can do it right away instead of waiting for a big gathering.
And I stress the open, honest, and fluent communication, especially with a condition like Duchenne or Becker. I loved when parents kept me up to date on what was going on, especially if the kid had a mobility issue. And like I said, even a heads up email in the morning, hey, he had a tough night, he didn't sleep well, he didn't really want to eat breakfast, he might be a little sluggish. Can you check in with him? That was all great. I welcomed that all the time because it just makes the child realize everybody cares, but we're also talking about how we can best support on a regular basis. Don't let 2 months go by and then all of a sudden, you're mad with the school because they're not paying attention, but you haven't said anything that maybe you needed to say too. That's never annoying. As Jody and Jill said, yes, please leave us alone the first week and a half of school. Because usually we're like that picture where the whole body is underwater and the hands are reaching up, because everything is coming at us. Don't forget, we kind of like changing tax law are also being bombarded by new math curriculum, reading curriculum, changes in this, changes in that reporting, a new attendance system, everybody coming in, and it's an awful lot. So lastly, I'll just say that I would receive a stack of IEPs at the beginning of the year. And unless something was life-threatening, like if this kid got stung by a bee, I often wouldn't look at them right away. Because first I want to just get to know your child. I don't want to have any pretense labels. I don't want to know if the kid couldn't sit still last year. This is all new. Let me meet the child first. So it's also not really helpful to bombard with right at the beginning of the school year, because it's going to go out of my mind quickly because I'm busy. But also, again, I want to just connect with your child. I want to bond with them. And educators know what's going on. We'll figure it out. So yeah, Alexis, I think you were going to say something. I'm sorry.
Well, and that's where the letter template can come in
Yep.
handy, right?
Yep.
Here are just the key things you need to know about my child, what they like, what helps them, what they struggle with, kind of on a high level basis. And we recommend giving that to, as Patrick said earlier, every teacher or staff member who comes in contact with your child throughout the day, so that they know. There's a high level overview of what Duchenne and Becker is. We have one separate for Becker and one for Duchenne. Again, they don't need to know all of the details of the disease diagnosis, the cafeteria staff, but they at least need to know that your child has this diagnosis. And another question that came in earlier around talking with the school was also about talking with peers. How do you talk to your child's peers? What do you typically recommend? When do you do that? Do you do it at the beginning of the year, as this first week is crazy, or do you wait? What's the best way to do that?
Can I answer that?
Yeah,
Or
go for
I
it, Jill.
don't want to step over anybody but I do a lot of that for, when the kids are little, we might set up the fire boot thing with the firefighters. Everybody tries running in the boots, so all the kids get what that feels like and maybe help their buddy out a little bit. When we get older, we do the spaghetti science experiment. These are things that we can always help with. I have found throughout all my years, honestly, that when kids know, they are incredible. They're
Yep.
incredible. They're incredibly helpful. And so it's really important. Again, probably not the first week. No. Probably got to have a conversation with your kid, make sure they're okay. Some kids want to be there while you do this. Some kids don't. It depends. Every kid is different. I've had kids not want to be there. They were there at the last minute and then they took over the whole presentation once it got rolling. So I think kids ultimately want their friends to understand that, there's a little bit. And I always start the presentations like, what are our commonalities first? Okay, we all like pizza. We all like this. We all like that. What's different? Oh, this is different about you. This is different about you. And it just kind of shows that, yeah, we all have commonalities and we all have differences. People, can do this as parents. You can get friends to do it. You can get some organizations in town to probably do it, or you can do one-to-one with us, and we'll give you some examples and exercises to make it fun. Right.
Yeah, I was going to add too, if you're followed by a neuromuscular program in a pediatric place too, a bigger hospital, you have access to child life specialists potentially. And that's a big service that our child life specialists do at Children's Hospital, is peer education and peer presentations. They oftentimes have a mileage where they can travel, but ours Zoom in all the time. So, that's something you can talk about with your neuromuscular team's child life department, whether they do peer presentations or not.
To quickly add on to that, and we got another question coming in. Best time to talk to peers, particularly young in elementary school. Your elementary school teacher is going to do that anyway. The kids will come home with all kinds of stuff about themselves and other classmates. So they do like days and days of getting to know each other because they want to build positive classroom culture. So I would say that's a good time to talk to the teacher and say, you know, when should I give them a little presentation about muscular dystrophy? I don't know where you live, but where I live, my elementary child's open house is tonight. But usually in the first few weeks of school, not a parent meeting, but the schools will have an open house where it's a 15, 20-minute walkthrough. The teacher introduces themselves. Here's what the classroom space looks like. That's a good time to go up to them and say, hey, by the way, I know you know this already, but I want to come in, talk to the kids a little bit and stuff like that. I know we're real short on time. So if we didn't answer your question again, please email us, but we do have one more. Alexis, do you mind if I just read it since I'm running my mouth?
Go
Okay.
for it.
Yeah, our son is having, what about during recess? The boy is exhausted by participating in running activities, tag, etc. What are some things we can talk to the school about that could be an alternative for recess or different things they could do at recess?
I always tag the adaptive PE team at the district level or the school level and or your child's PT. And I always say, ask them what are some adapted alternatives to popular recess games that those individuals can come teach the whole group. And so your kiddo can still participate, but in some adaptive versions of some games that the other kids can then learn to do as well. I'm a huge fan of social time. So if that's not in the question or in the scenario for y'all, what other outdoor activities can we do at a picnic table or something that still encourages sunshine and peer time, but with preserving energy? But for sure, adaptive PE and PT, I often ask for our PTs to transition their minutes of service to lunchtime, at least temporarily, to work through some of this stuff with the neuromuscular kiddos and their peers.
That's so smart, Jody. That's so good. I love that. And I did that with my son. I found out with the little girls. I can't remember what grade he was in, but it was starting to struggle at recess. And I found out what the little girls were doing, and they were playing that heads up game or whatever they were all obsessed with. So I bought it and sent it to school with him. And all he did was sit at a picnic table with that game, and a couple girls came over. And then before you know it, because the girls came over, the guys came over. And it was like that became a thing where people would take turns playing board games. And then whoever was the kindest to them that week, I'd treat them for Chick-fil-A or whatever, So yeah, there's again, creativity too.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, I know we are at the end of the hour, but before we wrap, I just want to go around the Zoom room and ask for each of you to share one key takeaway that you would like for the parents and families on this call who are watching live and or the recording. What advice do you have? What is one key takeaway on how to advocate for your child for a successful school year? Jody, we'll start with you.
Thanks a lot. If we're sticking to our slides for our takeaway, my one key takeaway would be that I'm going to borrow from other people too. My one key takeaway would be being a partner with your school team is the best way to request consideration of additional support, and understanding your rights is a great way to maintain positive momentum moving forward with your kids.
Jill, you're next.
Oh, okay. I think I wish I would have known this. I mean, I might have even heard it, but I didn't listen. This is a marathon, not a sprint. You've got 12 years of school and maybe more, and you got to pace yourself. And I promise it's going to be okay. You're going to have some years that are better than others. You're going to have some teachers that are better than others. But it will be okay if you just stay consistent and stay collaborative.
All right, Patrick.
Please don't get upset that you don't know everything. Nobody knows everything. Reach out for help. It is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. If we don't know the answer, we will find you the answer. Please don't think you have to do this alone. It is overwhelming and it's a lot, and we are happy to help you. Don't feel bad if you don't know. We don't know everything either. Thank you very much for listening today. We hope this was helpful. Alexis, back to you.
And Stephanie, if you want to pull up that slide with our emails on it, again, Please reach out to us anytime. As Patrick said, you don't have to do this alone. PPMD's resources and support services are free of charge for families. This is what we're here for. We're here to help you with school, with care, with anything that you need. As Patrick said, if we don't know the answer, we'll get you connected with someone who does. We have experts like Jill and Jody that we can tap into. So please reach out if you need anything at all. And thank you so much for attending today's webinar. And we hope to talk with you all soon. Take care.